All right, guys, picture this. It's summer. It's unbearably hot. You grab your towel, head to the beach, and jump into the cool ocean water. You feel safe, right? I mean, sharks don't just attack people for no reason, right? Well, believe it or not, there was a time in America when scientists actually believed that sharks were harmless. They called them timid sea dogs. They said a shark's jaw wasn't strong enough to break a human bone. But in July of 1916, that theory was ripped apart, literally. Today, I'm going to tell you the terrifying true story that inspired the movie Jaws. It's the story of 12 days of absolute nightmare on the Jersey Shore, where a single sea monster hunted people not just in the ocean, but in a backyard creek. This is the 1916 shark attacks, and trust me, you might not want to go swimming after hearing this. If you love true horror stories and history, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button right now. It really helps the channel. And if you're new, smash subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss the next story. Also, I have a question for you guys. Drop a comment below. What is your biggest fear? Sharks, spiders, heights? Let me know down there. All right, let's travel back to 1916. Chapter 1. The Summer of Heat and Fear. July 1, 1916. The east coast of the United States was melting. It was one of the worst heat waves in recorded history. In Philadelphia and New York City, the asphalt on the streets was turning into goo. There was no air conditioning. To make matters worse, a terrifying polio epidemic was sweeping through the cities, killing children. Desperate to escape the heat and the disease, thousands of wealthy Americans fled to the Jersey Shore. The grand hotels of Beach Haven, New Jersey, were packed. The ocean was the only escape. Men in wool bathing suits and women in heavy dresses flocked to the water. At that time, the concept of a shark attack was almost a myth. The leading oceanographers of the day, specifically the directors at the American Museum of Natural History, had gone on record stating that sharks in the temperate waters of the Atlantic were harmless. A wealthy banker named Herman Ulrichs even offered a $500 reward, a huge sum in 1916, to anyone who could prove a shark had ever attacked a human north of Cape Hatteras. The prize had never been claimed. People felt safe. They were wrong. Chapter 2. The First Strike. On the afternoon of July 1st, Charles Vansant, a 25-year-old from Philadelphia, decided to take a quick swim before dinner. He was young, athletic, and the son of a prominent doctor. He was staying at the luxurious Ingleside Hotel in Beach Haven. Vansant swam out about 50 yards. He was laughing, playing with a Chesapeake Bay Retriever dog in the surf. People on the beach watched him. Suddenly, they saw a dark, gray fin slice through the water behind him. It wasn't rushing, it was gliding. A man on the beach shouted, "Watch out, shark!" But Vansant couldn't hear him over the crashing waves. Vansant began to swim back to shore, not out of fear, but just to finish his swim. As he reached shallow water, chest deep, something grabbed his left leg. It didn't just bite, it held on. Vansant screamed. The water around him instantly turned a bright, shocking crimson. He thrashed wildly, fighting an invisible weight that was trying to drag him out to sea. A brave lifeguard named Alexander Ott and a bystander rushed into the blood-filled water. They grabbed Vansant's arms. A tug of war ensued. The shark refused to let go. It was shaking Vansant like a rag doll. Finally, as Vansant's body scraped against the sand of the shallow beach, the shark released him and vanished into the deep. They dragged Vansant onto the sand. The sight was horrific. His left thigh had been stripped of flesh. A tourniquet was applied, but the femoral artery was severed. Vansant bled to death right there on the desk of the Ingleside Hotel manager's office at 6:45 p.m. Chapter 3. The Denial. You would think this would start a panic. It didn't. The newspapers reported the death, but the scientists dismissed it. They said Vincent must have been attacked by a sea turtle, or maybe a killer whale, or perhaps a tuna. Sharks don't do this, they insisted. The beaches remained open. The warning signs were not put up. The $500 reward for proving a shark attack remained unclaimed. The experts were arrogant, and their arrogance would cost lives. Chapter 4. The Red Water of Spring Lake. 5 days passed. The heat wave got worse. 45 miles north of Beach Haven lay the upscale resort town of Spring Lake. It was the playground of the rich. On July 6, Charles Bruder, a 27-year-old Swiss bellhop who worked at the Essex and Sussex Hotel, had some time off. Bruder was an ex-soldier and a powerful swimmer. He swam far out beyond the lifelines, enjoying the cool water. A woman on the beach looked through her binoculars. She saw Bruder swimming. Then she saw him throw his arms up in the air. She screamed that she saw a red canoe capsizing. It wasn't a canoe. It was Bruder's blood. 2 lifeguards, Chris Anderson and George White, launched a lifeboat. As they rowed toward the red stain spreading in the water, they saw Bruder's head above the surface. He was screaming, his face a mask of pure terror. As the lifeguards reached him, they reached down to pull him into the boat. They realized with horror that Bruder was light. The shark had bitten off both of his legs, one below the knee, one above the knee. The massive predator had struck with such force that it had snapped the bones. They pulled the dying man into the boat. Bruder looked at his missing legs and whispered his final words. "A shark got me. I'm a goner."
Chapter 5. Panic on the coast. Now there was no denying it. This was a monster. Panic exploded along the East Coast. "Shark kills bather," screamed the headlines of the New York Times. The governor of New Jersey called for action. Armed motorboats began patrolling the shores. Steel mesh fences were installed in the water at some beaches to protect swimmers. Scientists were baffled. What kind of shark attacks humans, and why was it moving north? But the shark wasn't done. It was hunting, and it was about to do something that no one thought was biologically possible. It was leaving the ocean. Chapter 6. Into the Creek. 30 miles north of Spring Lake was a small town called Matawan. It was not a beach town. It sat inland, connected to the ocean by a small, winding tidal creek called Matawan Creek. The creek was muddy, brackish, and narrow. At low tide, it was barely deep enough to stand in. It was a swimming hole for local kids, far away from the dangers of the ocean. No shark had ever been seen there. It was impossible. On July 12, a local sea captain named Thomas Cottrell was walking across a bridge over the creek. He looked down and saw a massive gray shadow moving upstream with the tide. It was 8 feet long. Cottrell ran into town shouting, "There's a shark in the creek! Get the boys out of the water!" The townspeople laughed at him. "A shark? In a creek? You've been in the sun too long, Tom." They ignored him. That afternoon, a group of young boys, including 11-year-old Lester Stillwell, were playing in the creek at a spot called the Wyckoff Dock. They were splashing, laughing, and cooling off in the murky water. Lester was floating on his back. Suddenly, his friend felt something rough brush against his leg. He looked at Lester. Lester was staring at the water, his eyes wide. Then he screamed. A violent swirl of water erupted around him. The boys saw a tail, gray and rough like sandpaper, break the surface. Lester was pulled under. The other boys scrambled up the muddy bank, screaming, "A shark! A shark got Lester!" They ran naked into town of Matawan, shouting for help. Chapter 7. The Hero. The town emptied. Men grabbed pitchforks, ropes, and guns. Among them was Stanley Fisher, a 24-year-old tailor. He was popular, strong, and brave. When they arrived at the creek, the water was calm. Lester was gone. The men refused to believe a shark was in the creek. They thought Lester had suffered a seizure or drowned. "I'm going in," Fisher said. "Don't do it, Stanley," his friends warned. But Fisher wouldn't leave the boy's body down there. He dove into the murky water. He surfaced, took a breath, and dove again. For an hour, he searched the muddy bottom. On his final dive, he found something. He felt Lester's body. He grabbed the boy. But he wasn't alone in the darkness. As Fisher broke the surface to yell that he had found the boy, the shark attacked.
Chapter 8. Blood in the Water. Stanley Fisher was fighting a war in waist-deep water. The townspeople on the bank watched in horror. Fisher had found Lester Stillwell's body, Fisher's right thigh. This wasn't a nip, it was a crushing bite. Fisher, realizing he was being eaten alive, didn't scream. He fought. He punched the water and the hard sandpaper skin of the shark. He managed to drag himself toward the muddy bank, the shark still attached to his leg, thrashing violently. "Help me!" he finally gasped. The men on the bank snapped out of their shock. They formed a human chain, grabbing Fisher's arms. A brutal tug-of-war began, men versus monster. The shark held on with terrifying determination. Finally, unable to drag the men into the water, the shark released its grip and disappeared back into the murky depths. They pulled Fisher onto the grass. The wound was catastrophic. A massive portion of his thigh was gone. The local doctor, Dr. Reynolds, ran from the crowd and applied a tourniquet, but the loss of blood was immense. They put Fisher on a stretcher and rushed him to the train station to get him to a hospital. He remained conscious, looking at his friends. "I did my best. I got Lester." Stanley Fisher died on the operating table that evening from shock and blood loss. He was the third victim.